You don't need to shout. You don't need to defend yourself at full volume. You don't need to send paragraphs, essays, or long messages pouring out your heart, begging to be understood by someone who wasn't listening in the first place. You don't need to plead your case like you're standing in front of a judge trying to avoid a sentence. You don't need to keep proving your worthiness to someone who only values you on the days it benefits them. You don't need to fight to be heard. You don't need to carry the emotional weight of someone who refuses to carry their own. You don't need to exhaust yourself trying to make someone finally get it. What you need is one moment, one decision, one shift rooted not in fear, not in anger, but in self-respect. And that single shift can change the entire landscape of a relationship, an argument, a dynamic, or even your life. One quiet pivot, one calm boundary, one internal choice that says, I'm done participating in my own mistreatment. That's where everything starts to change. And here's the truth most people don't want to say out loud because it's uncomfortable, because it exposes what we didn't want to see, because it forces us to recognize patterns we tried to excuse. Toxic people are not complicated. They're predictable. They don't come with mystery. They come with cycles. You don't need a psychology degree to identify them. You just need honesty. Honesty with yourself about what you've been overlooking, tolerating, and excusing for far too long. They show up with the same tactics in different bodies. Different names, same behavior. Different faces, same cycle. They poke until you react. They twist your words. They flip blame. They guilt, trip you into apologizing for things you didn't do. They provoke, then pretend. They create chaos, then call you dramatic for responding to it. They want you emotional because emotional people are easier to manipulate. Emotional people try to fix things, calm things down, restore peace, even when they aren't the ones who broke anything. And toxic people count on that. They make you feel like peace is a luxury you don't deserve. Like clarity is something you have to beg for, like you are hard to love, too sensitive, too reactive, too much. But the moment you stop feeding that cycle, when you stop responding to the bait, when you stop giving them the reaction they're fishing for, the entire dynamic collapses. The game ends. Not because they changed, but because you did. And the place where it's a silent boundary, not a loud one. Loud boundaries come from panic and pain. Silent ones come from clarity. Loud boundaries scream, please stop hurting me. Silent boundaries whisper, you won't have access to me if you continue. And that whisper is louder than any argument. A silent boundary doesn't require an announcement, a speech, a warning, or a dramatic exit. It's internal. When someone crosses your line, you don't explode, you don't threaten, you don't fight. You shift quietly, smoothly, intentionally. You stop replying as quickly. You stop oversharing. You stop explaining every feeling. You stop giving them the benefit of doubt they never earned. You stop entertaining conversations that go nowhere. You stop trying to fix something they keep breaking on purpose. And that silence, it is deafening. Not to you, but to them. They feel it. They sense the withdrawal, the shift, the lack of fuel. They don't say it, but they know it. Because toxic people rely more on your reactions than your words. Your reaction is their power source. When you remove it, they feel powerless. And let me tell you this clearly, silence is not passive-aggressive when it is protecting your peace. It is self-preservation. It is strength. It is choosing peace over performance. It is choosing dignity over drama. You don't need to debate people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't need to win arguments with people who thrive on conflict. You don't need to convince someone of the truth when they benefit from the lie. You don't need to defend yourself to someone who already decided to see you through the lens of their own insecurity. When someone shows you a version of themselves that is cruel, manipulative, dismissive, or emotionally draining, the question isn't, why would they do that? The real question is, why did I stay after they did? And once you ask that question with honesty, the door begins to open. You begin to see the pattern not from the inside, where everything is blurry and confusing, but from the outside, where everything is clear. The uncomfortable truth is that many toxic people only stay in your life because you keep handing them reasons not to leave. You keep explaining their behavior back to them. You keep minimizing your pain so they don't feel uncomfortable. You keep editing yourself to avoid conflict. You keep shrinking your needs to fit inside their limitations. But the moment you stop over-explaining, they panic. Because over-explaining isn't communication, it's control for them. They thrive on your need to be understood. They use your explanations to twist the story. They turn your clarity into confusion. That's why no is a full sentence. That doesn't work for me is enough. I'm not comfortable with that is enough. I'm not discussing this again is enough. I don't agree is enough. Your boundaries don't require their approval. You don't owe paragraphs to people who wouldn't give you a sentence of accountability. You don't owe softness to people who weaponize it. You don't owe access to someone who misuses it. Next time a toxic person tries to bait you, tries to get a reaction out of you, tries to dig into old wounds, tries to provoke an emotional explosion, don't react. Mirror not emotionally, but calmly. Let their sarcasm hit a wall of indifference. Let their insults bounce off a face that doesn't flinch. Let their drama fall flat on the floor. Let them watch you protect your peace without lifting your voice. It confuses them. It frustrates them. It exposes them. Why? Because they cannot argue with someone who refuses to step into the ring. Toxic people need you emotional. They need you reactive. They need you triggered. They need you invested. They need you frustrated. They don't know what to do with calm. They don't know how to manipulate silence. They don't know how to twist neutrality. They don't know how to attack someone who isn't participating. And then comes the deeper layer, cutting access, not just contact access. There is a massive difference. You can block someone's number, but if they still live in your head, they still have access. You can unfollow them online, but if you still check their page, they still have access. You can avoid them physically, but if every decision you make revolves around what they might say, they still have access. True healing begins when you close access, not just doors. Cutting access means they don't get emotional updates, internal thoughts, personal information, or front row seats to your growth. They don't get the version of you that tries to prove your heart. They don't get the version of you that stays up late overthinking conversations. They don't get the version of you that needs closure. Closure is self-given. Access is self-controlled. Peace is self-created. You stop talking about them. You stop checking on them. You stop replaying arguments. You stop wondering if they'll ever change. You stop letting their voice echo in your head. You stop letting their shadow block your light. That's where emotional freedom starts, when they lose the privilege of occupying your mental space. Because if someone can disrespect you once and still remain in your life without consequence, you've taught them something. You've taught them that your boundaries are flexible, that your silence is tolerance, that your forgiveness is automatic, that your self-respect is negotiable. And they will take advantage of that flexibility every time. But the first time you calmly show them that your boundary is not a suggestion, it's a requirement, everything shifts. Not because they transformed, but because you did. Because you decided you will no longer be someone who tolerates the behaviors you cry about. You will no longer be someone who bends until you break. You will no longer be someone who justifies someone else's emotional immaturity at the cost of your own well-being. One firm, quiet move can reclaim your entire peace. And this is not about revenge. It's not about being cold. It's not about being heartless. It's about drawing a line that says, I love myself too much to live inside your storm. Because the moment you make that choice, the storm loses its power, the wind loses its force, the clouds begin to break, and something inside you finally breathes again. There's a shift that happens inside you the moment you stop negotiating your worth. A moment when you no longer feel the need to convince someone that you deserve basic respect. And that moment is quiet. It's not dramatic. It doesn't come with a final speech or a cinematic goodbye. It comes in the form of a thought that settles into your chest like a stone. I'm done giving people discounts on access to me. This is where the real transformation begins. Because once you stop bending your boundaries to fit inside someone else's comfort zone, you start to see the world differently. You start noticing who gets uncomfortable when you choose yourself, who pulls away when you stop being easily manipulated, who suddenly calls you cold or selfish when the truth is that you stopped being available for their one-sided convenience. And that clarity is powerful. Not because it shows you who they are, but because it shows you who you've become. The moment you raise your standard even slightly, the people who benefited from the lower one will react. Some will get angry. Some will guilt trip you. Some will act confused as if they have no idea why things feel different. And some will fall silent, realizing their usual tricks don't work anymore. But you keep your center. You stay grounded, because the version of you who tolerated crumbs is gone, and the version of you who expects respect has finally stepped forward. You'll also notice something else, something subtle but life-changing. You begin to hear your own voice again, not the voice that apologizes for existing, not the voice that minimizes feelings to avoid conflict, not the voice that tries to be palatable so others stay comfortable, but the voice that knows your truth, speaks from your truth, and stands firm in your truth. The voice that says, I don't need you to understand me to honor myself. And when that voice becomes louder, the world around you shifts. Your decisions become clearer. Your reactions become calmer. Your boundaries become cleaner. You stop giving people the cheat codes to your emotions. You stop letting certain names ruin your day. You stop replaying conversations that should have ended the moment they disrespected you. That's what growth feels like, not loud, not angry, just certain. But here's the part that most people don't talk about. When you start choosing peace consistently, you will feel the discomfort of old habits trying to pull you back. The urge to respond, the urge to justify, the urge to defend yourself, the urge to prove you're not the villain they make you out to be. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. That's the version of you who survived by explaining everything, and breaking that habit feels like withdrawal. Your nervous system isn't used to calm. It's used to chaos. Your emotions aren't used to clarity, they're used to confusion. So when you choose silence instead of reaction, your body may panic. It will feel strange, wrong even, because for the first time, you're not feeding the emotional monster that kept you trapped. You're starving it, and anything that gets starved fights back. But here's where you breathe through it. Here's where you remind yourself that discomfort doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, it means you're doing something new. And every new boundary has a breaking in period. You're teaching your mind that being respected is normal. You're teaching your heart that being spoken to gently is normal. You're teaching your nervous system that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. This takes time, but every small moment of restraint, every quiet boundary, every calm response, every decision to walk away instead of react, it rewires you. You become someone who doesn't need to defend your worth because you no longer allow people who question it to stay. And then something powerful happens. Your life starts to feel peaceful in a way you didn't know was possible. Your mornings feel lighter. Your conversations feel safer. Your relationships feel healthier. Your mind feels quieter. Your body feels calmer. Because the weight you carried wasn't stress, it was people. People who demanded more than they ever gave. People who wanted your emotional labor but not your emotional well-being. People who expected access to you even when they didn't respect you. People who treated your boundaries like suggestions instead of requirements. But the moment you choose yourself consistently, those people fall away. Not because you chase them out, but because they cannot survive in a space where manipulation starves. They thrive in confusion, not clarity. They thrive in emotional chaos, not calm strength. They thrive in vulnerability they can exploit, not confidence they cannot penetrate. And when they leave, or when you walk away, the emptiness that follows isn't loneliness, it's space for better people. Space for peace. Space for self-respect to root itself deeper. Space for the version of you who never had room to breathe. You start to realize the truth: you were never hard to love. You were just easy to use. And now you're not. This is where your next chapter begins, not with a new person, but with a new standard. The standard that says, my peace is non-negotiable. My boundaries are not suggestions. My voice matters even when it's quiet. And the version of me that tolerated disrespect is gone. And from this point forward, everything changes, including you. You ever notice how people who live on edge don't just speak with intensity, they carry an atmosphere with them? It's like standing next to someone holding a live wire. You don't have to touch it for it to shock you. The energy jumps on its own. And if you're not paying attention, you take that shock personally. You think it's about you, or your mistake, or something you could have prevented. But most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, you're just the closest person standing there. And people on edge don't discharge their stress into the universe, they discharge it into whoever is near. The problem is, we interpret that as a cue to fix, explain, defend, or absorb, but the real skill is knowing how to hear someone without becoming their emotional extension cord. So when someone comes at you sharp, you're going to feel it in your body first. Your chest tightens, your jaw locks, your breath shortens. That's your nervous system saying, incoming. But here's where people get stuck. They treat that body alarm as a command instead of a notification. Just because your body reacts doesn't mean your mouth has to. That's where control starts. When someone is hot, you stay cool. Not because you're weak, because you're choosing not to let their storm set your temperature. Think about it like this: an airport runway doesn't stop being a runway just because the pilot is panicking. The runway stays level so the plane can land. You being calm is not you being passive, you being stable on purpose. And part of staying stable is pausing, not the dramatic, silent treatment kind of pause. The micro pause, the 1 second recalibration that makes sure your response comes from clarity instead of reflex. Most conversations go wrong because the reaction beats the thought to the finish line. A person on edge says something loaded and your instinct runs out the door before your sense can catch up. That's how arguments start. That's how misunderstandings multiply. That's how you get dragged into a place you never meant to go. But when you take that pause, even a tiny one, you interrupt the cycle. That pause is the seatbelt that keeps you from flying through the windshield of their emotions. But what makes the pause powerful isn't the silence, it's what you check during it. You check your own intention. Are you responding to be right or to stay in control? Are you reacting to their emotion or to the meaning you assumed behind their emotion? Because people on edge tend to sound like they're attacking when they're actually overwhelmed. They speak like everything is urgent even when it's not. And if you mistake intensity for hostility, you'll armor up when what they needed from you is direction, not defense. It's wild how much smoother conversations go when you stop treating volume as a message. Another thing you have to remember is that people on edge are often scanning for threats, not truths. They're hypersensitive to tone, to speed, to hesitation. They're not listening to what you said. They're listening for what feels dangerous. And if you meet their edge with your edge, their brain reads it like confirmation. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to fix them. But if you can keep your tone grounded, calm, and slow, you stop their avalanche from gaining speed. That doesn't mean talk to them like a child. It means talk to them like you're not auditioning for their chaos. And yeah, they might try to pull you into that chaos, not always intentionally. Sometimes it's the only way they know how to communicate. When someone's whole life has been tension, they don't realize they're speaking from a wound instead of a thought. They're not trying to be hurtful. They're trying to be heard. But when they express pain loudly, people often hear anger instead. And when people hear anger, they push back. And then both sides feel misunderstood. And the whole thing spirals into a tug of war where no one is winning. That's why your job is not to pull harder. Your job is to put the rope down. Putting the rope down looks like this. You don't match their energy. You don't chase their exaggerations. You don't defend against every sharp edge they throw out. You respond to the meaning, not the mood. When someone says something like, "You never listen," and you immediately defend yourself, you're playing tug of war. But if you respond with, "It sounds like you feel unheard," you're acknowledging the feeling without absorbing the blame. Suddenly, they're not fighting a person. They're expressing an emotion. And emotions are easier to diffuse than accusations. And a big part of not getting pulled in is understanding what's yours and what isn't. The moment you start taking responsibility for someone else's emotional temperature, you lose control of your own. You don't have to be cold. You don't have to be distant. But you do have to be separate. Someone else's urgency is not your emergency. Someone else's frustration is not your failure. Someone else's bad moment is not your job to repair. You can help someone without becoming them. You can support someone without syncing with them. You can care deeply without carrying everything they're carrying. When someone on edge is speaking to you, your real goal is to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. A thermometer rises with the room. A thermostat controls the room. Thermometer people absorb. Thermostat people adjust. When you respond with measured tone, with slow breath, with calm pacing, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping them come back down. Your steadiness becomes a cue that says, "We're okay. This isn't dangerous." We can slow down, and something powerful happens when you stop letting someone else's edge dictate your behavior. You start seeing the truth behind their reactions. You start noticing the fear disguised as frustration, the overwhelm disguised as anger, the insecurity disguised as certainty. And when you can see beneath the edge, you stop personalizing the surface. You respond to the human, not the heat. And when you do that, the conversation changes shape immediately. There's a moment in every tense conversation where you can feel the fork in the road. One direction leads to escalation, both of you getting louder, more reactive, more convinced that the other person isn't listening. And the other direction leads to clarity, calm, and the kind of connection that doesn't happen by accident. Most people never recognize that moment. They feel the heat rise and they assume the only option is to match it. But the truth is, you have more power in that moment than you think. You get to choose which direction the conversation goes, and the way you make that choice is by controlling the pace. People on edge move fast. They talk fast. They assume fast. They react fast. And if you let them set the speed, the conversation will run you instead of the other way around. Slowing your pace, your breath, your voice, your timing slows the whole interaction without you having to tell anyone to calm down, which never works anyway. When you slow down, you create space. Space to think, space to understand, space to actually hear what's being said instead of what you fear is being said. And in that space, the other person starts slowing down too, even without meaning to. That's the thing about emotional energy, it sinks. When someone is anxious and you move fast with them, the anxiety multiplies. But when someone is anxious and you move slowly, they eventually adjust to your rhythm. You teach them how to communicate with you based on how you communicate with them. People rarely realize how contagious their tone is. But calm is just as contagious as chaos, and when you choose calm consistently, you're teaching the other person that the conversation is safe enough to settle. You also protect yourself by defining your limits, not out loud, not as a threat, but internally, because if you don't know where your boundaries are, you won't know when the interaction is crossing them. And when someone is on edge, that line gets crossed quickly. Maybe they raise their voice, or they interrupt, or they blame you for things that aren't yours. Those moments are invitations to either lose yourself or remain yourself. And boundaries are what let you stay grounded. A boundary is not a wall, it's a doorway. It tells you what you will step through and what you will not. It tells you how you will show up and how you won't. It gives you the freedom to stay compassionate without becoming consumed. One way you protect that boundary is by choosing your role. A lot of people unconsciously take on the role of fixer, savior, or shock absorber when someone around them is overwhelmed. But those roles drain you. They make you responsible for emotions that don't belong to you. The only role you need in a tense interaction is the role of observer, communicator. You observe what's happening, and you communicate clearly about what you're willing to engage with. When you observe instead of absorb, you see their reaction without it becoming your reality. You hear their emotion without it becoming your responsibility, and you step into the conversation from the outside, not the inside, which makes it much easier to steer. And steering is everything. Because talking to anyone on edge is not about overpowering them. It's not about winning. It's not about proving yourself. It's about guiding the interaction in a direction where both people can actually be heard. Think of it like guiding a heavy shopping cart with a broken wheel. If you push it hard, it will veer off and fight you. But if you guide it gently, steadily, patiently, it will move where you want it to go. People on edge are similar. Push them hard, match their intensity, and they'll resist. Guide them steadily, and they'll follow your lead without realizing it. That doesn't mean you let them walk over you. It means you set the tone instead of reacting to theirs. Another part of not getting pulled in is staying rooted in facts. When someone is on edge, they often get swept up in assumptions, exaggerations, and worst-case interpretations. Their stress paints everything with the same brush. A small issue feels catastrophic. A single concern becomes a character judgment. A misunderstanding becomes a threat, and if you're not careful, you'll get pulled into refuting every exaggerated point they make. That's how conversations derail. You end up defending things you didn't say, proving things that were never true, justifying things that were never the issue. The antidote is anchoring everything back to the clear, simple factual pieces you actually can address. It sounds like, here's what I heard, or here's what I'm responding to, or here's what's actually happening. When you narrow the field, you reduce the chaos. When you reduce the chaos, the edge softens. But facts alone aren't enough. You also need emotional clarity, because someone on edge doesn't just need accuracy, they need safety. They need to know the conversation won't turn into a battlefield. And emotional clarity is how you provide that. It comes from tone. It comes from intention. It comes from not making assumptions about their motives. It comes from recognizing that intensity doesn't always mean hostility. Some people speak from stress the way others speak from habit. And if you can respond to the person rather than the pressure, you create an environment where they don't have to fight to be understood. And one of the strongest tools you can use is simplicity, not shortness. Simplicity. Clear sentences, steady tone, slower pace. The fewer emotional threads you introduce, the fewer chances the conversation has to spiral. Over-explaining is one of the fastest ways to get pulled into someone's chaos. When you ramble, they find more angles to misunderstand, more places to grab on, more opportunities to twist your words. Simple, clear communication leaves less room for confusion and fewer entry points for escalation. It keeps the interaction grounded. Something else that protects you is recognizing patterns. People on edge aren't unpredictable, they're reactive. They tend to react in familiar ways. Some get louder, some get colder. Some get defensive, some get dramatic, and when you learn the pattern, their behavior becomes less intimidating. You stop seeing it as a personal attack and more as a predictable response to stress. And when something is predictable, it's manageable. You can prepare, you can adjust, you can respond instead of react. And maybe the biggest piece of all is letting go of the need to fix the entire moment. People get overwhelmed trying to resolve everything in one conversation, and that pressure pulls them into the other person's emotional urgency. But you don't have to solve everything right now. You don't have to end the conversation with perfect peace. Your only job is to move it forward without losing yourself. Sometimes progress looks like clarity. Sometimes progress looks like a pause. Sometimes progress looks like saying, I hear you, and I want to continue this when we're both in a better place. That's not avoidance. That's leadership. That's control. That's choosing not to be dragged into a space where nothing productive can happen. Because at the end of the day, talking to someone on edge is less about them and more about you. Your composure, your pace, your boundaries, your intentions, your ability to stay rooted in who you are while someone else is temporarily disconnected from who they are. When you can do that, you don't just avoid getting pulled in, you become the person who knows how to navigate tension with clarity, with steadiness, with strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. When you step back and look at everything we've walked through, you start to see a pattern. Talking to someone on edge isn't about mastering the perfect sentence or memorizing a communication trick. It's about mastering yourself in the moment where most people lose themselves. It's about understanding that intensity doesn't automatically equal danger, and that volume doesn't automatically equal truth. It's about reminding yourself that you don't have to match someone's emotion to respond to their message, and that real strength isn't in overpowering a moment, but outlasting it with clarity, steadiness, and choice. You realize that staying calm is not the same as staying silent. Pausing is not the same as backing down. Boundaries are not walls. You don't use them to shut people out. You use them to keep conversations healthy. You've seen how slowing your pace sets the tone, how simplifying your words protects the interaction, how responding to feelings instead of accusations keeps things grounded. And maybe most importantly, you've learned that you are allowed to step out of a conversation that's becoming unsafe, unproductive, or emotionally draining. Permission doesn't come from the other person. It comes from you. Because the truth is, people on edge don't need you to take on their emotional weight. They don't need you to fix everything. They don't need you to absorb their stress or match their urgency. What they actually need, what everyone needs, is someone who can stay steady enough to keep the conversation human. someone who doesn't get swept away, someone who doesn't turn every spark into a fire, someone who listens without losing themselves and speaks without hurting themselves, someone who knows the difference between helping and carrying. And when you communicate from that place, something powerful happens. You stop fearing tense conversations. You stop bracing every time someone raises their voice or rushes their words. You stop letting other people's emotional storms decide who you are. You start walking into every interaction with a quiet confidence that doesn't need to control the other person because it already controls you. And that's what keeps you grounded, centered, and in control, even when the person in front of you isn't in control at all.